Hey, if you're looking to buy or sell a small business and you're thinking that the buyer would use an SBA loan to help acquire the business, then the SBA actually has quite a role in determining the maximum value or the maximum valuation of the business. And I'm going to walk you through this template calculator tool that we've developed that gives you a high-level view of how much of an SBA loan you might be able to apply for or qualify for a particular small business. And then that kind of allows us to back into what's the maximum value that small business could potentially have. So if you're a seller wondering how much might I be able to actually get for my business if the buyer's going to use an SBA loan, or if you're a buyer and you're wondering, I want to make sure that my offer that I'm making for the small business is going to actually have a chance at qualifying for an SBA loan, then I think this calculator is going to be really helpful. So let me kind of walk through, there's only a handful of assumptions, but I'm going to walk through these kind of step by step. Before I do that, I'm going to put a link in the description of the video below to this free calculator tool. And also, I guess, just a little bit of background on me. My name's Adam Huxema. I'm the co-founder of ProjectionHub. And before starting ProjectionHub, I was an SBA lender myself for about 12 years. We made about 1,500 SBA loans during my time as the executive director of a lender called Bankable. And we did work on a handful of acquisition deals, and I work on a lot of acquisition deals now in my role as owner of ProjectionHub, where we're helping clients create projections and business plans for potential acquisitions. And this is one of the things that I keep seeing where there is a proposed business sale or an acquisition, and the price point and the valuation is at a level that just will never qualify for an SBA loan. And so what I wanted to do is build a little tool that allows folks to kind of figure that out. What's the maximum valuation that might qualify for an SBA loan? So, all right, with that, let's go ahead and walk through how this works. Okay, so this first assumption here is this average annual earnings, or EBITDA. EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. This is basically your earnings for the business. Now, there can be lots of adjustments to this, and you'll notice this probably in your process of buying or selling a business. If you're working with a broker, let me talk about add backs. What can we add back? So, your tax return may say, here was the profit of the business. It was $100,000. But you had some owner's compensation, or within the expenses, you were paying for the owner's personal vehicle, or they're paying for their health insurance, or paying for some travel that maybe was actually a little bit of personal travel in there as well. And so there's ways to add back expenses and then kind of come up with this adjusted earnings or seller's discretionary earnings. So that's really the number that we're looking for here. Now, there is a difference then in what the business broker is probably going to say is the adjusted earnings or seller's discretionary earnings versus what the bank might be willing to agree on as that number. And so a common example there, let's say on the tax return, you had $100,000 profit for the business, and you paid yourself as a business owner, you paid yourself $100,000 as well. As a salary. And so it was showing up on your tax return as an expense and owner's compensation. So the business brokers are going to say, you can add that back. You can add that $100,000 back. And so your new seller's discretionary earnings would be $200,000. It's the profit of the business plus what you paid yourself as the owner. So $200,000, right? Now, the lender, on the other hand, may say, well, we're not going to add back that whole $100,000 of owner's compensation, because when the owner leaves, someone's going to have to replace the owner for the work that they were doing, and they'll need to be paid. They'll need to be paid a salary. And so, maybe what they would say is, okay, we can make a case for why we can replace the owner with somebody who makes $75,000 a year instead of $100,000, let's say. So the lender might say, you can add back $25,000 of that owner's compensation, but not the whole 100. Okay, so in that case, we'd say right now our earnings is the $25,000 we're adding back of owner's compensation plus the $100,000 profit that we showed on the tax return. Okay, and as you play around with those numbers, ultimately has a big impact on how much of an SBA loan you can qualify for, and therefore what the valuation of the business is going to be. All right, so we can come back to that later, but let's look at the rest of how this is calculated. So the next important assumption here is the debt service coverage ratio. So the SBA is typically going to require a debt service coverage ratio of 1.25 or above. And so let's just say we kind of try to make this as close to the edge as possible to get maximum value out of the business. So if we had earnings of $125,000, that means we can support $100,000 of annual debt service and maintain that 1.25 debt service coverage ratio. It means that there's $1.25 of earnings up here for every dollar of debt service, right? So if we know that our maximum annual debt service is $100,000, then we can back into how much of a loan we can apply for. So the typical term on an SBA loan for an acquisition is usually 10 years. Right now, interest rates probably around 10%. So we're going to use 10% and 10-year term. And then based on those assumptions, we're able to determine what is the maximum monthly payment that we can have. That's just $100,000 divided by 12 to come up with that monthly payment. Calculate what the monthly interest rate is going to be and the number of months of payments, and ultimately then we can kind of do our algebra here from high school. We can kind of back into what this maximum loan amount is able to be. So $630,000 SBA loan based on these assumptions. Now that does not mean that the valuation or the price of the business needs to be $630,000, because the SBA loan is probably going to represent 90% of the acquisition. Typically, the buyer is going to need to put in 10% as a down payment. So if we assume 10% is an equity down payment and we can have an SBA loan for $630,000, that means the estimated business value is $700,000, right? And that's the maximum, right? So let me point out some things that can bring this value down that you should be aware of. So let's say the buyer says, hey, I'm going to need some working capital to run the business. Okay, on day one, I'm going to need some working capital. And so I actually need, let's say, $30,000 of working capital. I need that to be cash in the bank on day one. Well, where's that going to come from? Well, I guess it's going to come from either the equity or the loan amount, right? And so it may be that they take $30,000 here out of the loan amount and they're keeping that in the bank, in the cash account. So what are they actually providing to you as the seller? They're giving you what's left over. They're giving you the $600,000 plus the $70,000. So now your estimated business value is $670,000. Now, what about loan closing fees or legal fees or other fees that are part of the process? Let's say they want to include those fees as part of kind of the overall deal. That's probably also going to have to come out of something here. It's coming out of the loan or the equity here. And so again, that may end up reducing how much you get cash in your hand as the seller. And so these are things that kind of chop away at the value of the business. But the thing that can't really change is you're not going to be able to borrow any more than this, right? Based on the historic cash flow of the business. And that's how the lender's going to look at it. They're going to say, how did the business perform previously? We're going to assume that it's going to perform similarly going forward. So if it last year did $125,000 of earnings, we're going to assume that again for the following year. And that's what we're going to use to calculate a reasonable loan amount that we could get approved. Now, again, 1.25 is probably about the most leverage you're going to be able to get approved. So it might actually be 1.5. So if we change, if the lender says, we actually want you to have more cushion here, we want you to have a debt service coverage ratio of 1.5, we see what that does to the maximum loan amount that you can borrow and ultimately what the estimated business value is. So I think this is important both from the buyer's perspective and the seller's perspective to really understand, how the SBA is going to look at this. And you can see the importance here of those add backs. So the more you can convince the lender that you could add back, if you can make a compelling case that no, we really should be able to add back all the owner's compensation because they were just taking $100,000 out of the business, but maybe they were passive. They were not even in the day-to-day of the business anymore. If you can make a really compelling case for that, maybe the lender says, okay, sure, we'll let you add that full $100,000 back plus the profit, gives you $200,000 of EBITDA. Now you can see how the business value increases. So a handful of moving parts here, but wanted to walk through those and just kind of help you think through the different scenarios and how the lender is going to be looking at this. So if you have questions about a deal that you're looking at either from the buyer side, or you're thinking about selling your small business and want to look at it from an SBA perspective, we can help with that. We help clients with what we call a quality of earnings stiff test, or with acquisition projections and helping you understand what is going to be possible from an SBA perspective. So we'd be happy to help with that. You can reach out to us at support@projectionhub.com if you're interested in our help on either of those things. And again, if you want to use this calculator, you can go to the link in the description of the video below and grab this for free, download it for free, and utilize it. So if you have any questions at all, reach out to us at support@projectionhub.com. We hope this has been helpful. If it has been helpful at all to you, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. That really helps us out and spread the word to share with other business owners, small business owners, and folks looking to acquire small businesses. All right, thanks.